The Legend of Zelda is a game franchise filled with many different locations throughout the years. Some absolutely stunning and truly iconic landscapes over these years. Every game pretty much has its own unique art style, and this really adds to how some of these locations have changed over the years. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at some of my favourite, most iconic locations throughout the franchise and how they've changed over the years of me playing The Legend of Zelda. I will be focusing on home console titles, but I am aware these locations have appeared in handheld games as well. Also, I want to say a huge thanks to recent donators Mello and Zelda Empress. It all means a lot to me, and as for my first time receiving something I never even imagined of, I just want to personally thank you, as this will go straight back into the channel to fund better equipment and whatnot. Also, quick note, most of these locations all appear in the same 3 games, so I thought I'd keep it to that, as these 3 games are my favourites, all from different time periods. Anyway, let's take a look at how some of these locations have changed over the years of home console Zelda. So let's start off looking at the iconic Hyrule Field. So Hyrule Field actually only appears in 5 games throughout the franchise, these being the original Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, The Minish Cap, Twilight Princess, and Breath of the Wild. I will be cancelling out Minish Cap for this one, so sorry Minish Cap. Anyway, let's take a look at how this iconic location changed throughout the 4 games. So to start us off, we look back to the first Zelda game, where Hyrule Field was of course at the time a massive open field filled with an adventure. Now obviously due to system limitations at the time, the full field couldn't all be shown at once on the screen, and the game was also 2D. So the field worked by scrolling in different directions to move to different sections of the field. As this Hyrule Field is fairly basic, the big feature of it would have to be the enemies. You can find enemies such as Tektites and Octoroks pretty much all throughout the field, and in certain areas more enemies like Zoras, when they were actually enemies in the game, believe it or not. Now if we move on to the next game, Ocarina of Time, well, what can I say? Entering this field for the first time was some experience. The music and the size of the field made the experience truly amazing alone. So this Hyrule Field is definitely a big change from the last one, but it doesn't actually serve much purpose other than a sort of hub world, so to say. We get our first look at the field after leaving the Kakariko Forest at the beginning of the game. The first big thing that you'll notice when leaving Kakariko Forest and entering the field itself is Lon Lon Ranch. Other than that, the field itself isn't honestly that interesting or serves much purpose, other than travelling to new locations. As I said, sort of like a hub world for Hyrule. Now please note, I'm definitely not trying to hate on the field, and more just build a quick analysis to compare it to the next game. Now back to it being like a sort of hub world. Well, to the north is of course Castletown and Hyrule Castle. To the east of there we find Kakariko Village. Further east is Zora River and Zora's Domain. To the southeast, Kakariko Forest and Lake Hylia. Then over to the west, Gerudo Valley and Fortress. So it's clear the field in this installment is pretty much a hub world for travelling. So it's definitely more advanced and interesting than the last Hyrule Field from the original Zelda game. Moving on to Twilight Princess, this Hyrule Field is around 5 times bigger than in Ocarina of Time, as it splits into multiple sections, basically all surrounding the castle in the centre of the map. There is an event or two in Twilight Princess that takes place in Hyrule Field, which does give it some usage over Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field. One of these events is travelling with the young Zora Prince and battling off enemies to bring him to safety in Kakariko Village. So that is one big reason to how the field changed this time round, giving it some more game usage. A huge usage of the field is actually the final boss battle itself, which indeed takes place in Hyrule Field. I think it's fair to say the field serves a lot more purposes and has indeed changed, mainly due to the field being split into multiple locations, and including game events to keep the field from serving the same purpose as the last game. All this together really did change the field from Ocarina of Time, and honestly was really well done in my opinion. Move along to the most recent game, Breath of the Wild. Well, this game changed it up a lot. This can mainly be said due to the new insanely large size of the field and the game itself, and this is all due to the fact that Breath of the Wild is indeed an open world game. So this does mean the field itself is just another area in the game, but I guess some interesting things have been added to this version, such as the Easter eggs of naming locations after previous games, which Breath of the Wild did a lot of actually. The most notable one is got to be the ranch ruins, which was pretty cool to go and revisit. Possibly this is more than an Easter egg, but that's something to explore another day. The field itself has really changed in size, which brings in a few new features, such as these massive rocks, stables, hills, and so on. So that is how Hyrule Field has changed over the years. Now, let's look at something a little bit more hot. Well, I did say hot, so let's look at me now. Wait. Death Mountain only appears in 3 of the 3D games in the franchise, these being Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Breath of the Wild. Moving back to Ocarina of Time, this Death Mountain begins at the foot of Kakariko Village. You will enter first as Child Link after passing the guard in Kakariko Village. From there, you take on the task of scaling the mountain, which isn't too big a challenge as you might have thought. You only really face 4 or 5 enemies on your way up. The mountain itself isn't as developed as the upcoming games, and more so just a linear pathway to Goron City and of course Dodongo's Cavern. If we move forward 8 years, we find Death Mountain again in Twilight Princess, a beautiful Zelda game where the real personality is at. Anyway, personalities aside, the game is really beautiful to me, and Death Mountain is no exception. The format follows similar to Ocarina of Time, but a little bit more advanced. Upon first entry, you actually need the Iron Boots back from Oridon Village to battle your way past the Goron to get up to the first part, and then a few more along the way. After this, there is a lot of scaling up heights and avoiding falling rocks. Oh, and those damn hot steam things. Damn hot steam things. One of the rocks you avoid is actually a massive blazing rock that you go on to use later in the game for unfreezing a certain area. To make your way to the top, we use the Goron's Tower advantage, and at the same time they are not so friendly about it, but it works. Later in the game, after the dungeon, you're pretty much free to use the Gorons for scaling these heights, once you're now friends with them. Personally, I love the feel to this area in the game, especially the relationship you build with the Gorons. Now to Breath of the Wild. As I said for Hyrule Field, it really does change how the area works due to the open world aspect. Well, as open world as the game is, there is actually a sort of intended path to follow, which is a fairly heated trial up the mountain. You will face a Guardian and an Igneo on the way up, along with Fire Keys and Fire Choo-Choos. You know you're almost there when you reach the mining point with the Gorons. Then we trial up past an enemy settlement, and then you're pretty much there to Goron City. As the game is open world, it is possible to find alternative routes, which isn't always as easy as you might think, as you will come across massive lakes of lava and a lot of steep upwards mountain, and of course a lot of enemies. So throughout the years, Death Mountain has changed from a one-way linear route to Goron City all the way to a fully explorable mountain, which is really interesting and something that is really cool to see, as when Zelda went open world, they of course had to find a way to work around finding new areas, and Death Mountain did this really well. This next location is personally one of my favourites in the entire Zelda franchise. We look to Kakariko Village. I love this certain location, as it has always had a peaceful and relaxing vibe to me. Anyway, we first see Kakariko Village in A Link to the Past, the 3rd installment in the franchise, and a pretty good one as well. The village itself, as you can see, is fairly basic compared to future installments due to the time, but it did have multiple buildings and features to it. This was our first real look at the village, so I guess you could say it's not too bad for the first entry. If we fast forward 7 years from 1991 to 1998, we find the village again in Ocarina of Time. This Kakariko Village is honestly one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting of them all to me. As a child in the game, the village seems fairly peaceful, and it is pretty peaceful. You have multiple buildings just as a link to the past, so all is fairly normal, along with the graveyard at the back, which is slightly creepy. Move on to the adult era. This is where it gets a bit more creepy, as for one, you go down to the bottom of the well, and of course enter the Shadow Temple at the back of the graveyard, which, just thinking about, is really creepy, like most things in Ocarina of Time are. The whole Field Town area can go from peaceful to creepy right after pulling the Master Sword and fast forwarding 7 years into the future. Now to Twilight Princess. This village is another one of my personal favourite installments of Kakariko Village. The entire village appears to be abandoned and almost wrecked. We do soon come to learn a lot more about why the village looks like this, and basically a little bit of backstory, which is pretty interesting to me. As for the design, the team really did change it up a good bit from previous installments. The village has a long path through the centre, and all the buildings along both sides. The design of the buildings are very unique to the franchise and in my opinion look really cool. You can even scale your way up to the top of a watchtower in the north of the village, and you can also make your way up the houses, which I thought was really cool. Now to Breath of the Wild. Kakariko Village here, as you can probably tell almost instantly, is heavily inspired by Japanese architecture, which I absolutely love. The village from the front entrance all goes slightly downhill, with small rows of small hut-like buildings, until we reach the bottom of the village, where we can find both the village inn and also the arrow shop. Oh, and of course, Impa's place. What a stunning structure this is, and the waterfall background makes it even more amazing and beautiful. This version has to be my favourite of them all, due to the Japanese inspiration for not just the design, but also the music and the design of the Sheikah clothing and the general feel around the village. This is the sort of place you can go and feel relaxed and safe, unlike in Twilight Princess, which for some reason, to me anyway, has a sort of western feel to it. So Kakariko Village went from a fairly basic but yet lore-filled village to this new, redesigned, Japanese-like village, and honestly, I love Breath of the Wild's version by far. Well, that's how 3 of the most iconic locations to me have changed over time in the Zelda franchise. This video was a little different from normal, but I really enjoyed talking about my thoughts on the changes to these locations over the years. Be sure to let me know some of your favourite reappearing locations in the Zelda franchise and your favourite installments of them. Be sure to join the Discord server if you haven't already, and get the server to 100 members, cause that would be pretty awesome. Be sure to follow me on other social medias to keep up to date, and I really hope you're all having a wonderful day or night wherever you are. And until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.